We've all had the experience of a book that's been overhyped, and when you finally get to read it, you're disappointed. Well, I'm delighted to say that Boy Swallow You's Universe by Trent Dalton is not that book. I actually put off reading this book because the hype made me think that I was going to be disappointed. It had so much hype. Everyone loved it and everyone reviewed it. The best book on earth, blah, blah, blah. I didn't believe a word of it. I don't always believe that an award means the book is good, and I tend to think that hype means it isn't. It'll be forgotten the next day. So it wasn't until 2022 that I read this book. I can't remember how long it had been getting hyped before that, but oh yes, some years. This was published in 2018. But when I finally came to it, it was amazing. All the hype was true. How often does that happen? I actually have a signed copy. I'm a tiny bit proud of that. I don't have too many signed copies. So I delayed reading it because of the hype. Normally hype means this omnivorous reader is going to be thoroughly disappointed, but I was awed. So for anyone watching this who isn't in Australia, you may not have heard the hype. It's a very, very Australian book. It's set in Brisbane in the 1980s. I was living in Brisbane when it came out. I wasn't in the 1980s, so I did go through once or twice. And it has an interesting characteristic that doesn't often work for people, but actually does here. Our main protagonist is Eli Bell, who's a 10-year-old, and his brother August, who's a couple of years older. They're living their life as kids do on the south side of Brisbane. The south side of Brisbane is a little bit dodgy in places even today. It was maybe even more so in the 80s. So they come from a suburb that is less than salubrious. And it is got a very innocent feel. The narration done by the adult and the point of view seen through the primary school child, they flow together seamlessly, and that doesn't often happen. Many times an adult trying to write from a child perspective comes across as needlessly childish or incredibly childlike in a naive way. Eli and August aren't naive, not where they live and what they see. And the adult's perspective bleeding through the child's experience somehow come out as better than either viewpoint would normally be. It's quite exotically well done. Yes, so Eli's best friend is Slim, who is a grown man who's also known as the Houdini of Boggo Road Jail. If you aren't from Brisbane, you may not be aware of Boggo Road Jail. It's notorious. You can do ghost tours through it now, and it isn't a jail anymore, but it's still notorious. It was exceptionally notorious when it was actually working. Slim was an ex-inmate who'd escaped so many times that he was called the Houdini. His other best friend is his brother, 1 year older, 11, who does not speak. August can speak, it's just that one day he decided he wasn't going to, and he stuck to it. August is a constant character in this book, and for all that he never says a word, Eli normally knows what he's thinking about things, so it's an interesting and intriguing character and plot development to have August always silent yet not silent at the same time. So another friend of Eli's is Darren, who goes to the same school as him. Darren is of Asian descent, and his mother is called Bishdang, and she is a drug importer, and that's where Eli and August's stepfather Lyle gets his supplies, because both Lyle and their mother are druggies, which doesn't seem particularly odd to Eli, because I think most of the adults he knows actually are, or they're drug runners. So this is the complex, complicated, and intricate life that Eli and August live. It's gritty. It is gritty. There is swearing. If you're someone who really doesn't like the F word and the C word, there's plenty of them in here, so I'm not sure this book will really do it for you, but it doesn't feel like it's wrong or meaningless. It's not gratuitous swearing, it's in context swearing, and so for me that's fine. It didn't bother me. Swearing doesn't bother me in a book unless it seems out of place. Here it seems in place. So, adults, concepts. Eli's inner life is entertaining and vivid, and his relationship with the world around him seems authentic. I've never felt that I want to over-explain this plot to someone who hasn't read it, because it's been reviewed so heavily that the plot has been picked over till it's the bare bones. And none of those reviews charmed me, and none of them convinced me to read this book. Because you can talk about the plot all you like, but the plot doesn't actually make you understand how enjoyable the reading experience is going to be, because it is the actual writing that does it for you. You can open this at random and start reading, and any given paragraph that you encounter is going to be interesting and it's going to be charming. So the Bogorow jail is a central part of the narrative in several different ways. I enjoyed that because I have toured it once or twice before. There's a lot of local Brisbane features which will appeal to people who've been there. There's a fair bit about PTSD, drug dealing, jails, quirky. Somehow all of this is quirky, gritty and quirky at the same time. Anyway, yes, so I won't say too much about the plot, but I will say a couple of things. Eli, his goal is to become a writer, which, you know, isn't maybe the easiest goal for someone who comes from what's essentially a slum and has got druggy parents. I mentioned earlier that one of Eli's best friends is Slim, the Houdini of Bogorow jail. Early in the book, Eli comes across Slim sitting at the kitchen table writing letters, and he asks, "Oh, who are you writing to?" Slim says, "I'm writing to various prisoners who don't get any letters," and having been in prison himself, he knows how important letters and contact with the outside can be to a prisoner. And Eli listens to that and says, "Oh, can I do one?" And Slim says yes, and he thinks about it for a bit, and he pushes across a name, and he says, "Why don't you write to him?" So here is that first letter. "Dear Alex, my name is Eli Bell. I'm 10 years old and in year 5 at Darra State School. I have an older brother named August. He doesn't talk. Not because he can't talk, because he doesn't want to talk. My favourite Atari game is Missile Command, and my favourite rugby league team is Parramatta Eels." And then he goes into a story about how August and he went for a ride and they got in a fight. And he ends up with, "On our way home, we saw a dragonfly on the footpath being eaten alive by green ants. I said to August that we should put the dragonfly out of its misery. August wanted to leave it be, but I stood on the dragonfly and squashed it dead. But when I stood on it, I killed 13 green ants in the process. Do you think I should have just left the dragonfly alone? Yours sincerely, Eli. P.S. I'm sorry nobody writes to you. I'll keep writing to you if you want." You see what I mean by the child and the adult get together perfectly in this narrative? Anyway, so Eli's overjoyed when a couple of weeks later he receives 6 letters back from Alex, 3 of which were devoted to memories about times in Alex's childhood when he'd been intimidated by boys and the fights that he'd gotten into. So Eli asks Slim who this Alex is, and wants to know who his new pen pal is. "That's Alex Bermudez," he says, "sentenced to 9 years in Bogorow jail after Queensland police found 64 illegally imported Soviet AK-47 machine guns in the backyard shed of his home in 8 Mile Plains, which he was about to disperse among members of the rebels' outlaw motorcycle gang, of which he was once Queensland Sergeant-at-Arms." Trent Dalton, how do you think these things up? It's just charmingly bizarre. And all through this book, Alex and Eli keep corresponding, and it becomes important to the narrative because Eli never gives up on his dream of becoming an author. And he's certainly got a few hurdles to overcome there. And toward the end, it's Alex comes out of jail, and this is my favourite part of the book. This is on my frequently read shelf because every now and then I want to reread a specific section and nothing will content me until I've picked up the book, same for most of these books on this shelf, and reread that section that I want. Now, I won't read all of it because there's plenty of it and it's absolutely amazing. But after their stepdad's gone, their mother gets together with someone else, and that doesn't end well. And toward the end, they get their mum back from this guy who's big DV scene, and that's when Alex comes in. "The lady said you're done," said the man in the grey coat, and the boy said, "Bleep," off. "Who the bleep are you?" he spits. The man in the grey coat shrugs. "If you don't know me, then you don't want to know me," the man says. "I'm starting to love this man like I love Clint Eastwood in Pale Rider." That whole section, I think, even if you read the whole book just to get to this part, this is a part of your life that was well spent reading this. I love it. I reread it, bits of it often. In a couple of years, I'll reread the whole thing, and then there'll probably be another review of me fangirling over how amazingly a really good author can make something zing. If you haven't read it, I really think you should. If you like Australian literature of any kind, you should. I have only one criticism with this book. Trent, what is that goddamn telephone in the basement under the house that can't possibly be there and isn't there? Magic realism has its places in books, but not a weird little effed up nothing thing that connects to nothing ever, is never explained, and yet is kind of an integral plot. Because if it hadn't happened, all the next things wouldn't have happened. What were you doing there? What were you doing there? Anyway, other than that, brilliant. I'll forgive it, but don't do it again.